Georgia, a land shaped by people, conflict, and change. Georgia's story begins long before it became an American state. Before Atlanta rose a major city, before European ships reached its coast. For thousands of years, native peoples live across the region's forest, river, mountain, and coastal plains. Archaeologist evidence shows that the human life in Georgia traces back more than 13,000 years to the final stage of the Ice Age, when sea levels were far lower than today. Over time, native societies developed complex cultures. Archaeologists describe this long period as Philo, Archaic, Woodland, Mississippian. During the Mississippian era, roughly from 800 to 1500, communities built large towns, farmed maize, and created impressive artwork mounds. Sites as Etowah, Okumulji, Kolomoki, and Nakochi still preserve the evidence of these societies. They built organized communities, trade over long distance, produced art, and formed political alliances. By that time European arrived, Georgia was home to several native nations and communities, including the Cherokee, Creek, Yamasee, Guale, and Hitchiti. Their territories, language, and political system are different, but all would be deeply affected by colonizations. Spanish explorers were among the first Europeans to enter the area. In the 16th century, Spanish expeditions moved along the coast and through the interior. Hernando de Soto crossed the parts of the Georgia between 1539 and 1542 while searching for wealth and a route across the continent. His expeditions made powerful native chiefdoms, but it also helped spread violence, disturbance, diseases to which native communities had little resistance. Spanish later established coastal Catholic missions, but Spanish control remained limited and faced English expansion from South Carolina. By the early 18th century, the Spanish mission system in Georgia had largely collapsed. Warfare, slave raids, diseases, and forced immigration reduced the native population and changed the balance of power across the region. The British colony of Georgia was founded in 1732 and named for King George II. James Oglethorpe, a British soldier and member of parliament, became the leading figure in the colony's creations. Georgia is often described as a refugee for debtors. But the first settlers were not prisoners. The colony had a strategic purpose. Britain wanted a buffer between the South Carolina and Spanish Florida. The first settlers arrived in 1733 and established Savannah. Oglethorpe and colony's trustees imagined a society based on small farm, controlled land ownership, and limited inequality. At first, slavery was prohibited. The trustees also restricted large landholdings and tried to prevent the rise of a plantation elite. That vision did not last. Many settlers wanted the same profitable plantation system that existed in South Carolina in 1749. The ban of slavery was overturned. Enslaved Africans were imported in rapidly growing numbers, and large plantations expanded along the coast. Rice, indigo, and later cotton became the major crops. Enslaved workers brought agriculture knowledge, skills, language, music, food, tradition, and spiritual practices. In the coastal, low country, and sea islands, these influences helped create the distinct Gule Gitsi culture. Georgia became a royal colony in 1752. Its population and economy grew, but that growth dependency on forced labor during the War of Jenkins' Spanish force invaded, but Oglethorpe to stop them at the Battle of Bloody Marsh in 1742. When the American Revolution began, Georgia was younger and less populated than most other colonies. First, many residents hesitated to break with Britain, but revolutionary ideas spread, especially the belief that taxation without reservation violated the rights of English subjects. Patriots took control of the colonial government in 1776, and Georgia joined other colonies in declaring independence. The war was destructive. Savannah fell to British forces in 1778 and remained an important loyalist stronghold. American and French troops failed to retake the city in 1779. Enslaved people also made choices in the middle of the conflict. Many escaped to British lands seeking promised freedom. By the end of the revolution, Georgia had suffered major losses, but it had become a part of the new United States. The decades before the Civil War transformed Georgia in the invention of the cotton gin made short staple cotton easier to process. Cotton spread across the inland counties and became the center of the state's economy. Plantation owners gained enormous wealth, while enslaved African Americans performed the labor that made that wealth possible. By 1860, enslaved people made up 44% of Georgia's populations. This expansion also came at the cost of native nations. White settlers and state leaders demanded Cherokee and Creek lands. Gold discovered in the North Georgia in 1829 increased the pressures. Although the Cherokee created the written constitution and defended their rights in court, Georgia and the federal government pushed forward with the removal. In the 1830s, the thousands of Creeks and Cherokee people were forced to west. The Cherokee removal, remembered as the Trial of Tears, caused the death of the more than 4,000 people. In January 1861, Georgia left the Union and soon joined the Confederated States of America. Slavery was central to the social and economic system. The Confederate depended around 120,000 Georgians served in Confederate forces, while several thousand Georgians, both black and white, joined the Union Army. The war reached Georgia with terrible force. The Battle of Chickamauga in 1863 was major Confederate victory, but it could not reverse the course of the conflict. In 1864, Union General Williams Sherman launched the Atlanta campaign. After the month of fighting, Atlanta fell in September. Sherman then began his march to the sea, charting a path from Atlanta to Savannah. Railway roads were destroyed, livestock seized, plantation burned, and food supplies taken. The campaign damaged the Confederacy economy and left a deep scar in Georgian memory. The war also brought freedom to enslaved people, but freedom did not mean immediate equality. During Reconstruction, former enslaved men gained voting rights, and a legislation established public education and welfare institutions. Black communities built churches, school, businesses, and political organizations. White resistance was violent. Groups such as Ku Klux Klan used murder and intimidations to weaken black political participation. By the end of the 19th century, white Democrats had regained control of the state government. Poll taxes, literacy tests, white primaries, and other barriers pushed back citizens and many forced white citizens out of politics. Jim Crow segregation shaped daily life while terrorized African American communities. Georgian economy remained tied to cotton, but Falling prices, death, and wool weaving devastated farmers. Many black families lived as tenant farmers and sharecroppers, often trapped in poverty. Beginning around 1910, thousands Georgians during the Great Migration seeking job, education safety, and voting rights in northern and western cities. At the same time, cities such as Atlanta grew. New industry developed, including textile, timber, mining, transportation, and manufacturing. Coca-Cola, created in Atlanta in 1886, became one of the state's most famous products. Yet, modernization existed beside deep racial injustice. The Leo prank in 1915 and the revival of the Ku Klux Klan at the Stone Mountain rebuilt and the fear and violence of the freer. The Great Depression brought severe hardship to the rural and urban Georgia. Cotton prices collapsed, jobs disappeared, and families struggled to survive. New Deal program provided relief, supported farmers, expanded electricity, and funded public projects. Then the World War II changed the economy again. Military base, shipyard, and aircraft factories created thousands of jobs. By 1950, more Georgians worked in manufacturing than in farming. Struggle for civil rights became one of the Georgia's most important modern sectors. Atlanta was home to a large educated black communities and several historical black colleges. It also became the base of military Luther King Jr., who helped lead a nation movement of nonviolent change. Churches, students, local organizers, lawyers, and ordinary citizens challenged the segregation and voter suppressions. The Civil Rights Act 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 broke down the many legal barriers. Change remained difficult and often dangerous, but African Americans began returning to political life in greater number. Leaders such as Julian Bond and Andrew Young and John Lewis carried the movement into government and national politics. In the late 20th century, Georgia became more urban and diverse and economically powerful. Atlanta grew into a center of transportation, businesses, media, and culture. The 1996 Summer Olympics gave the city as a global stage. The state population passed 10 million in 2014, reflecting decade of rapid growth. Georgia's story is not a simple story of progress, it is a story of achievement and justice. Wealth and force level, democracy and exclusion, native civilization, enslaved African, farmers, workers, and soldier activists, immigrants, and political leaders all shape the state.